Hello everybody, my name's Annette Wilson and my business is Applied Posture Riding, and my specialty is rider biomechanics. Now what we're going to talk about in this little presentation is rider biomechanics, and we're going to be exploring the horse riding muscles. So hopefully this is going to be some new information for you and you can take it away and start changing the way how you train yourself for riding. Now, rider biomechanics is the study of movement, and movement requires a functioning musculoskeletal system. Horse riding requires a strong, stable but controlled movement system, and it's very unique to the horse riding skill. There's not very many sports that are similar to horse riding. The training of this system is done through movement patterns. Now, this is exactly the same as all elite training for a specific sport. Like tennis players will do drill after drill, and they call them drills, whereas with this sort of training, we call it movement patterns. Now, just before we get started, I just want to let you know who I am and what I do, and why I regard myself as a specialist in this topic. My name's Annette Wilson. I'm a South Australian. I grew up in South Australia, went through the pony club scene through to EA, and always had off-the-track racehorses. We didn't have purpose-bred horses in my day, so everything that we got were given to us. It was your horse, you trained it and you rode it. So I got into eventing, and that was my passion. I went right through from Low Pony Club right through to Adelaide International, Melbourne 3-day event, and competed in most states in Australia. So at the moment, I'm a retired event rider. I've gone into horse training. I rehab horses back to good health and soundness. I also rehab riders back from injury to being able to return to riding. I'm a rider coach, so I coach in dressage, jumping, cross country and training. I'm a physiotherapist and I have a master's degree in physiotherapy. Being a physiotherapist, most physios are specialists in human movement, and I'm a specialist in functional movement training, so I'm a functional movement trainer. This gives me the skills and the credentials to be a rider biomechanics specialist. I'm very experienced, I'm certainly passionate, and I've certainly rehabbed myself from my own injuries. So let's get into it. The riding muscles and rider biomechanics. The first group is the core group, and this is around stabilising for your whole spine. We're going to look at the trunk abdominal group, the trunk extensor group, the upper back scapular group, the hip muscles, the hamstrings and the quads in the leg, the calf and the foot, and we're going to examine what the difference between a stabilizer versus a mover muscle. So let's just have a look at two types of posture. Here we've got a rider in resting, and here we've got a rider in, same rider in what we call self-carriage. Now, riders ride in a resting posture and or they do ride in a self-carriage posture. Now, the difference being is that when our posture is relaxed, we have very little muscle activity. So here her body is a bit sloth, it's slumped, her core's dropped out. Now, with the core dropping out, we have a pattern of failure through the body or a pattern of success. So once the core muscle drops out, that's sort of a domino effect for many others. So her hands are resting here, they're not in self-carriage. She's allowed her lower leg to drop forward because there's no activity. Her toes drop down because there's no activity in the front of her shin, and her legs turned out. More than likely, she's got a bit of tightness in her hip rotators to the outside. So that's what we call a resting posture. Now, we have resting postures in every part of our daily life, as I'll show you in a minute. Now, this is a self-carriage posture, and certainly self-carriage is a word that you use in your training, particularly in dressage horses. So self-carriage, we've gone from a resting to an engaged posture, and the same with the dropping out pattern, we have an engagement pattern. Once you bring the core in, the back, the scapula, the pelvic floor, all tend to jump into line and activate that self-carriage posture. So it's an isometric muscle activity. In other words, the muscle contracts, but it's not moving a huge amount of range. So that's different to a moving muscle. So here her hands are in self-carriage, her core's in, her back's upright, she's engaged her hamstrings, she's resting on her stirrup now. So this is called a self-carriage posture. And if we walk upright, that is a self-carriage posture as well. Now, riders use both a static movement and we have what's called dynamic movements. So we use dynamic movements to ride in self-carriage. We also use dynamic movements to ride in a static posture because we do have some movement. So we engage our muscles, as I said, in an isometric movement pattern. Now here we're just quickly going to look at the self-carriage posture in a static position. So we're not moving now. Now this is not new information to any of you. We've got that line from the ear, shoulder, hip through to the heel. So that's an upright symmetry between the trunk and the abdominals. The pelvis in neutral, the chin's down, her shoulders in flexion, her elbows in flexion, her hands are in flexion with a grip. So we've got a triple flexion here. Pelvis is neutral, seat bones are equal, or they should be. We've got flexion, flexion, and flexion. Now that triple flexion there and that triple flexion there, they're patterns of engagement, and we can use them for training, and we can also use them to change training. So the movement here is very little, okay? So this is what we call isometric static self-carriage posture. This is a dynamic self-carriage posture. Now the difference now is we've gone from a static, no movement, the self-carriage posture when movement is the dynamic. Now this is much more difficult to control. It's much more difficult to stay balanced. We've got a lot of things happening. We need to learn to ride the movement, control the movement, balance and stabilize. We need to be able to keep the legs stable, the core stable, the back stable, but we then have to move the weight from the seat, out of the seat, through the feet and then back in again. So we've got a weight transfer. And as you can see in these three photos, this rider's slowly getting it, but not quite. She's quite loose in some areas. Certainly we haven't got the horse cooperating for various reasons. But in this case, what I like is that she's balanced through the neck strap and the neck. She hasn't balanced through the horse's mouth. So this horse is more likely resisting the leg than having a problem with the bit. Now the trouble with the dynamic carriage is it's much more difficult to stabilize. Now particularly in the rising trot, the sitting trot and canter, we have a lot of movement. So the self-carriage, as much as it's dynamic, it still needs to be very stable and controlled. So let's have a look at the major stabilizing muscles for riding. So we've got the core group, we've got the abdominals, and we've got the back extensors, and we've got the scapula or the shoulder blade extensors, and we've also got the hip stabilizers, which are the adductors and the internal rotators. I haven't got a picture of those here. Now the core muscle is made up of 3 muscles. Traditionally, we just talk about the transverse abdominal muscle. Now that's the deepest muscle layer of all of the abdominal muscles, and it certainly lies deep to all of the back muscles. Now the transverse abdominal muscle, the pubic floor and the multifidus make up the group. The traditional one that we train is the abdominal muscle. Now you can't, this movement, the movement of this muscle, the engagement of this muscle does not move any part of your body. So you have to be able to feel it. So we train the feeling of the muscle, and then we train function of the muscle, and we use it to build strength, to build more function. So this is a stabilizing muscle. It's not a moving muscle. Certainly the back muscles can move, but they're also static and can stabilize, and certainly the abdominals can also be moving muscles. So the major stabilizing muscles, the core, the deepest layer, our back extensors, our abdominal muscles, and certainly the deep muscles in our hip. So let's just have a quick look at the deep core muscle, because it is the most important muscle for stabilizing, and it's also the most difficult muscle to maintain strong and functional. So this muscle does not move any part of your body, but what it does move is it shortens the distance around your belly. So when the muscle's not engaged, we've got a pot belly. We've got a bit of a U back, and it interferes with the stability of the pelvis. Now, the photos on the left show that the core muscle is inactive. Now we've engaged the muscle, so we've got a tightening through the lumbar spine. We've got a drawing in of the muscle, so it reduces the circumference, so it will flatten your stomach and reduce your waistline. And again, as I said before, you get a pattern of success. It will bring in the pelvic floor muscles, and it will certainly activate these little muscles. You will see your tummy come in, but it does not move your body. It creates pressure and it stabilizes. So that's how the core muscle looks when it's out, and that's how the core muscle looks when it's in. So let's quickly look at the moving muscles now. So we've got many muscles that move our body, but the major ones, as I said before, are the back extensors. Now I've taken off the other layers here so we can see multiple layers. And as you can see, there's multiple levels here that we can engage. And you can certainly have a imbalance in these muscles. So you can get different areas where you get blocks and different areas where you get extra movement. Now the arm muscles control the reins, and they're not to be used for balance. And this is certainly one of the biggest features that we need to train for riding. The low abs, and here you can see they're cut off. We've got the deep transverse, we've got the vertical rectus, and then we've got the two obliques. So they control flexion and the movement of the pelvis, and they also control that upright posture. Our hip flexors, they control the tilt of the pelvis, and they also control mobility in the back and certainly just flex the leg on the pelvis. The quads straighten the knee, most people know that, and the hamstring bend the knee. But the hamstrings also play a role in controlling the stability, the tilt, and the movement through the pelvis. Now, the hamstrings is the major muscle that keeps your hip under your heel under your hip. Now, if you have a muscle imbalance in any of these groups, then you've got a problem with your riding. You've certainly got a problem with your daily posture. So what is a muscle imbalance? Now, the joint has a muscle that controls, so for instance, our quads will straighten our leg, our hamstrings will tighten, bend our leg. Now, if we have an opposing weakness, we will have an opposing tightness. So the coordination and the movement and the correct function of that joint is then compromised. So the more often we allow this imbalance to occur and move the joint without coordination, the stronger the imbalance becomes. So pain and injury will inhibit the major stabilizing muscles, and the imbalances will lead to poor coordination of the moving muscles. So a muscle imbalance can certainly affect your stabilization, and it also affects how you move. So the biomechanics of your movement. So in a nutshell, pain will inhibit the core muscle. This leaves the spine vulnerable, and you've got a setup for micro instability and injury. So for instance, if you walk with your hip toed out, you will start to have tightness through your hips. Now moving on, you can train all of your riding muscles for riding and for good posture using movement patterns. Now, movement pattern is different to an exercise. An exercise, if you want to strengthen your quads, you will do leg straightening with a weight and certain movements, and that will strengthen the muscle. But it doesn't necessarily incorporate the whole body. Now, movement pattern sets the whole body up. So here you can see if my core dropped out, my foot collapses, my hips rotated in, and the correct alignment and the training is wrong. So that sets up the person to have knee problems, hip problems, back problems, foot problems out of the saddle. Now, if you can't get that position correct out of the saddle, you're certainly not going to be symmetrical in the saddle. Now, the pelvic tilt must be trained in all directions. So here we've got the jumping posture. And the hamstrings control the hips as well as the lower leg. So the hands need to be trained for balance and function. So we train the lower leg and the pelvis with movement patterns. You also need to train left and right and left. So here's a pelvic tilt off to one side. We certainly need to be able to do it to the other side. We also need to be able to tilt forwards and backwards and rotate. So these are movement patterns. They're not necessarily just plain exercises. You can do the pelvic tilt in this position and certainly again in this position. Now, with all of these movement patterns, the first thing that we've engaged, and I'll show you this in a minute, is that the core is already pre-set up on demand to hold the spine stable so that you can use it. Now, once you've got these movement patterns trained, the function of the movement patterns is applied in the saddle, and this becomes your aids. So let's go through and teach you exactly the very first movement pattern that I use in my training program, and that's the core crunch. So what I want you to do is hold your fist up. Now squeeze your fingers tight and make a very strong fist, and then just relax it. Now that is a flexion finger crunch. We're going to do the same with the core muscle. So we're going to tighten the core, get it to squeeze as strongly as it can, and then we're going to let it go. So we're going to learn a core crunch. Now this is a movement pattern. It's also used in exercises, and it's the first step to be able to train your body for correct biomechanics. Now, if you can't contract your core on demand and you have pain or you've had any injury, it's more than likely that you are not using your core at all. So we take the inhibition away and we take the control to the brain. So the brain says yes, the pain says no. The brain takes over. We learn the core crunch, then we build from there. So the very first building block is the core crunch. Now this is often the problem or the starting point that's not given in or neglected in what we call the Pilates programs. So the starting point for all my core training is the core crunch. And I see very many people who go to Pilates who don't know how to bring their core in on demand. So how do you do a core crunch? Now, if you're sitting watching this presentation on a stool or a chair, sit forward, open your legs up, sit tall, put your hands on your hips, point your toes a little bit out, keep your knees pointing out over your toes so you've got this in correct alignment. So spread your legs wide, put your hands on your hips. This gives you a little bit of stability through your shoulders and it takes away too many sensory inputs. Now what we're going to do is activate the core by coordinating with your breathing. So I want you to take a breath. I don't want you to take a deep breath, so it's not a big and it's a gentle blow through your lips with a small hole only. So as if you're going to blow through a straw, okay? So what I want you to do is just start blowing and keep blowing long and strong, long and gentle until you can feel something happening in your lower belly. What you will feel is a tightness. You might feel your pelvic floor come in. You might want to lift your body. These are all of the associated connecting movement patterns that happen. But first up, I want you to gently blow and draw your belly button towards your spine. You can do it a bit later on. You can do it in this position. So the thing about turning the core crunch into function, the action or the activation is exactly the same, but the positions are going to vary. And this is what leads to functional core training rather than just always using your core in neutral spine. So take a gentle blow. You should feel your tummy lift and draw in towards your spine. Nothing moves, then let it relax. Then do it again, let it relax. Now the blow stops you sucking. Excuse me. Now if you suck, you're drawing up your diaphragm. And this is wrong, okay? No, it's not functional. You might draw your tummy in, but what we want is function. You cannot ride and draw your tummy in using your diaphragm. It does not stabilize your spine. So once you've done the core crunch pattern a few times and you're getting more established with it, you can then move on to holding the core crunch as you take more breaths. So we get the hold of the core. You can then move on to holding the core and doing a simple movement like sitting, getting off the chair and standing up. Now, once you've got this pattern established, there's a little shortcut you can use. Now, don't use this first up. Some people might be able to, but generally I don't like going to the second step. So what I want you to do is push your tongue to the roof of your mouth as you draw your core in. So basically you suck on your tongue. Now this is different to sucking breath in. So make sure you know the difference. Now once we've got the core crunch, which is, the major stabilizing part for the horse riding muscles, and you will find once you've got a good strong core, many of your horse riding muscles will come in as an established sort of a domino effect. Now this little pattern here, we're moving to strengthening the core. So this is an exercise as well as is a pattern. So we establish the core crunch, stabilizes the pelvis, and we use the legs as a lever to load and build strength through the core. So in my program, I've got a very detailed process of how to do this, because many of the people I see have pain and all sorts of imbalances, and we need to start stabilizing and then start looking at the imbalances. So it's a cause and effect, and an effect and cause. So certainly learning the core crunch and building from there is the most important step. Now, other movement patterns that I use in my training programs, and this is pure rider biomechanics. Here we've got the symmetrical hand posture. Here we've got it on the ball. Here we've got the diagonal split. This is a training pattern. Don't panic and think, oh, I can't ride with my hand up there. This is a training pattern. We don't train the end result. We train the pattern to get the end result, okay? You can't suddenly sit up straight and be perfect. You train to get there. So this is what we call a diagonal split hand movement pattern. Now the function of this pattern, once we've refined it down, is to be able to balance the inside rein and stretch the outside rein. And certainly you need to be equally efficient, because you're going to train movement patterns because you need to use both reins as an outside rein. We maintain the posture, we maintain all of the activity of the muscles, we maintain the core, and we independently move the shoulder from the trunk so that we can stretch the outside rein and balance the inside rein. Now coming back to the pelvic tilt, this is one of the single most important movements or dynamic movements for horse riding. If you can't tilt your pelvis, you're going to lose stability through your low back, you're going to balance through your reins, you're going to bounce in the saddle, you're not going to be able to stay in tune with your horse's movement, and more than likely you're going to block your horse's back and create all sorts of problems, because your horse will feel what you do, he will also feel what you don't do. So if you're riding a moving platform, you need to move with the platform. So here we've got the anterior tilt, we've got a neutral tilt, and we've got a posterior tilt. Now the anterior tilt tends to overactivate the back muscles. The neutral tilt, taking our hands out, certainly the Goldilocks position, and the posterior tilt. If you haven't been able to train this independent of the upper body and the hip, these are the postures that you will go into. So being able to move the pelvis into forward and anterior forward and posterior tilt independent is a skill that you have to learn. Now, I haven't put in here what injury, childbirth, fear affects your body. I'm certain you already know that. But what does it do to your horse? Now, we choose to ride and train our horses. Our horses didn't choose us, although probably some people out there think otherwise. So if you're not riding with correct symmetry, correct balance, correct biomechanics, you're bouncing around, you're pulling on the reins, you're hitting your horse's back, you're blocking your back, you're blocking his back, you're banging on his legs, you're gobbing him when he jumps, you're using your hands for balance, therefore using the bit, lameness, uneven gait, resistance, bucking, rearing. All of these problems certainly evolve over time. Now, we've all seen people or riders that really sadly get another horse that bucks and rears. Well, maybe people need to look at themselves before they blame their horse. So let's have a look at some of the common poor postures that will directly affect your riding. Now, all of you here or have heard, rider riding around, in some of these postures or all of them. Certainly this one's common, poking chin. And the instructor says, sit up straight. Well, you can see very clearly that you are not going to achieve that posture and be able to then apply aids in the saddle. You have to train out of the saddle. You have to train these imbalances out, and you have to train these good patterns in. Now, one of the most common problems in the general public is flexible flat feet. Now, this affects your riding indirectly in that it will give you quite severe muscle imbalances. And as you get older, you end up with arthritic knees, arthritic hips, losses of movement, and certainly muscles that weaken, and then others that tighten. So fixing flexible flat feet should start as soon as you recognize you've got that problem. It will indirectly affect your riding posture because of the muscle imbalances and the pain that it causes. Now, coming back to resting and upright postures, again, this is quite common. Core out, shoulder blades disengaged forward. Here we've got the core back in, the back extensors and the front abs equal, neutral pelvis, chin in. So a lot of muscle activity going on here. This is self-carriage in standing. This is a resting posture. And again, the resting posture to self-carriage is trained out of the saddle and reproduced in the saddle. Now, the more often that you train this as a movement pattern, then strengthen the movement pattern, you can use it as a function, and the function is you can sit upright with a strong, balanced, flexible posture. Again, reiterating these daily postures, if you sit like this, lift in poor mechanical postures, you will have problems with your riding. This all reflects, comes out in your riding. Don't believe it doesn't, because we are not generally built to be symmetrical. If you do a lot of running or play other sports, certainly the dominance of those sports, because not many sports are symmetrical, will reflect in your riding. And you can see here various pictures of really quite poor biomechanics. Here, certainly loss of stability through the leg. It's whipped out the back, although the hand position's quite good. But more than likely, this horse has been jumped with a restriction there. Therefore, to save himself, he brings his nose behind the vertical. This is wrong in so many ways. Driving in, blocking the horse, certainly blocked here, pounding away into the back, legs gone forward. So this weight here and this weight here are the counterweight. And certainly you can see here the action of the horse is not symmetrical. This is a jump rider, possibly turning onto a fence, swinging lower leg. Again, that's an anchor, counter anchor point. Same with this, lower legs drop forward, hamstrings dropped out, pushing the leg forward. So as soon as this rider rises out of the saddle, that leg is going to swing. And that's exactly what's happened here. This is just wrong in every aspect, and very sadly we see a lot of it. This is a Western rider, a whole new style, but still I would like to see that leg a little bit further back, because as humans we push through the platform. Now if we push through, we pull on something else, and that's just our human movements. Okay, so why do you need to get out of the saddle and do the groundwork? We've learned a little bit more about what muscles do what in riding. We've learned a little bit about what your daily life does to your posture and how that affects your riding. So first up, you really do need to understand why you have to get out and do the groundwork. We do groundwork with our horses, so you must do the same with your riding posture. You need to learn the movement patterns, then you need to apply them as functional movement patterns in the saddle. Now, we do this mainly and primarily because your horse deserves it. And so do you. We spend a lot of time, energy, money, passion on our riding. We really do want to be the best that we can be. And sadly, the riding posture seems to be the last thing that people look at. So your riding skills directly affect your horse, and never forget this. If you're in pain, your horse will feel it. We all know that a good rider will ride every horse well, and we all know a poor rider will create problems in every horse. So respect the effect that you have on your horse and blame yourself before you blame your horse, because you don't want your horse to be a victim of your poor riding and poor training. Now, the other reason is your body will not do it without doing the training. Your body won't suddenly adapt itself for riding. So you need to look at the muscle imbalances, an assessment, then correct these muscle imbalances with correct stretching and then correct muscle activation. This is part one of your training. You would add in exercises, and as I said, an exercise is different to a movement pattern. You want to do exercises for strengthening muscle groups, but you want to do a movement pattern for the whole biomechanical posture pattern. As you gain strength, you can add in the rider design movement patterns. You can progress to independent isolated control, and then you can look at the combined movement patterns, and these are all laid out in a correct rider biomechanics program. And certainly the function of all of these goes to the saddle. Now let's just look at why Pilates is not good enough for horse riders. Certainly Pilates is a great exercise program and it will train your posture, but it does not train the posture for riding. It doesn't include rider biomechanics specific movement patterns, and Pilates does not train strength other than in neutral spine. Now, to ride a horse effectively, we need a mobile pelvis, not a neutral pelvis. So the stabilisation of a mobile pelvis is different than the stabilisation of a neutral pelvis. And Pilates tends to not train the function of the core. It trains the strength, and sadly, many people don't transfer it to function. Horse riders need a functional core stability program, not just stabilising. So I hope you've enjoyed that little presentation on rider biomechanics and the horse riding muscles. It's certainly a topic that I can go on and on and on, and this is something I go into detail when I do my clinics. So if you want to learn more, you can explore my products and my training programs on my website, and I'll give you all of those details. If you're just interested in following me on Facebook for general tips, information, and please, I'd really like it if you do a like and a follow. And if you like what I put up, please share it to your friends, because this is a topic that is slowly growing and certainly one that is totally necessary. So my Facebook page is Applied Posture Riding. There's the link there if you want to copy that down. If you're interested in updates on products, clinics, general information, and certainly want to just ask me some questions, you can go to my website. And if you scroll down, there is a subscribe to form, and that will put you onto my mailing list. Now, I don't mail out very often. It's not a thing that I do. I certainly notify people of new stuff and clinics in areas, but I certainly don't spam you with a lot of marketing. Now, if you're interested in the movement training, in the functional movement training, the book that I recommend is my ebook. It's called Applied Posture Riding, The Fundamentals of Riding, and that's available on my website. So here's my details. My name, that's my riding. This is my current business address, my phone number, my email, and my website. Certainly, you can contact me through any of these modes or through my Facebook page. But if you're interested in looking at my products, go to my website, go to the menu tab shop, and that will take you through deeper into the back end of my website for some products and training programs. That's my ebook, Applied Posture Riding, The Fundamentals of Riding. It's certainly truly unique and has all the information that you need. So thank you for your time. If you've got any questions, certainly contact me through those modes. Enjoy your little core crunch and certainly start looking at the way you ride and the way you train. So good luck with your riding and enjoy. So thank you for listening.